Lately, I've been watching a lot of videos on the infrastructure of video game worlds. How towns are built and what they exist of, what the natural environment such as mountains and rivers are like, and how the NPCs go about their daily lives. All of these things, even though we may not have the details in the forefront of our mind, add a lot to our experiences. We might not consciously consider if the architecture makes sense or if the flow of the water defies gravity or not, but everything put together forms the worlds that we get immersed in. For example, I don't know a single person who wasn't moved by all the beautiful vistas in Skyrim, who didn't appreciate the busy crowds in Assassin's Creed, so on and so forth. However, since I began watching these videos, I've thought about the details constantly while playing video games. I say games plural, but this does mostly apply to open world games, and I've only played one of those lately. Infinity Nikki. Before you click off if this is not your type of game, just trust the process. This has less to do with the game itself and more to do with the programming and world within. This can be applied to many other games, so don't worry if you don't have any interest in or knowledge about the game. You don't need any of that. Anyway, if you haven't played Infinity Nikki, if it's not your cup of tea, it's a story-driven action-adventure game with a focus on fashion. It reminds me a lot of Genshin Impact with its gacha mechanics and open world environment, though not as combat heavy. It's pretty chill. As I've been running around doing my quests, something I can't help but notice is how bustling certain places feel, despite being relatively small. It might have to do with the aforementioned videos I've been watching, but I can't help but think about it more than I probably should, or maybe that's just what growing up with anxiety does to you. So while the world feels alive, how alive is it really? And what does it mean for a place, a game, to feel alive? To me, it's less about the environment and more about the inhabitants. When you think life, you probably think people, so that's where I decided to start. But first, let me introduce you to Florawish. This is the first town you see when playing the game, and yes, it is a town, but is this accurate? It'll be important for my assessment, but more on that later. We're sticking to this place as it's the first impression of bustling life that players will get. Also, I haven't really had enough time to progress to other areas yet. Despite it being a small town, it might seem overwhelming to know where to start, but I knew exactly where I wanted to begin. The NPC that sparked this video idea in the first place. The girl on the hill with the flowers. When playing the game, I kept seeing her start walking the exact same way from the exact same spot every time I would pass her. I've always wondered where she goes, so let's see if we can talk to her. Hey! Never mind. Naturally, I got curious. I wanted to see where she ends up, and there's only one way to do that. By following her, and I did this for 10 minutes. She walks down the hill, follows the waterfront, and then she simply turns around. Not really a destination, she's just out on a walk, and that's fair. It's a lovely walk to go on. But as I'm a lady of science, I followed her for 10 more minutes to determine if she just walks to and from the same spot over and over. The answer is, yeah, of course she does. The flower bouquet she's holding is not meant to go to anyone, she's not giving it to anyone or delivering it, they're just an accessory. It was nice to finally find out where she went. While following the flower girl, I came across an older woman also out on a walk, so I decided to follow her next. But first I had to delete the 200 gigabytes of House Flipper 2 footage that I had from my last video. Check it out if you haven't yet, by the way. This old woman might have recognized me from earlier, from when I was following the flower girl, so I decided to change my outfit so I wouldn't be caught as a creep. I don't want people to get the wrong idea. This is science, okay? I followed the old woman for a while, and her route was very similar to the flower girl's. But as she walks slower, it takes her closer to 15 minutes instead of 10. By the way, in-game, I started in the morning and finished in the night. It took her pretty much a whole day to walk that route. It's not easy getting old, guys. Also, I found her twin at the end of the route. Maybe she went to check on her? That's gonna be my new explanation. Yeah. It's very interesting to me that they give NPCs long routes like this, because if you walk far away enough, they despawn and only spawn back in at their point of origin. It's not a graphic setting. I checked, but my view distance was already on the highest it could be. This means they designed the game keeping in mind that players might be within a certain distance of a certain character for a while, which is unlikely, at least in the old woman's case as she's so slow, but it's cool of them to consider. While following both the flower girl and the old woman, I ended up by a small beach just outside of town. I watched them for a little while, as you do. People hang out there in the day, but go home around 9 p.m., which is right before nighttime in the game. However, they don't disappear until the player walks far away enough for them to despawn, and then they simply don't come back until morning. But when they do come back, they just spawn in right in front of you at 4 a.m. sharp. So if they go go home at 9 p.m. and come back at 4 a.m., that means they are only home for about 7 hours. I don't know what they do for these 7 hours. I assume sleep. When do they eat? There are no picnic baskets around the beach, so I assume they eat at home. But then they get maybe 5 hours of sleep every night, which is wild. I couldn't do that. Looking closer, they're all pretty static by the waterfront. Even the kids that should be running around are glued to the ground, pretty much. But just running past, like players are expected to, it does make the waterfront look pretty lively just to have them around. Another place I walked past when following the flower girl and the old woman was this small dock. This dock is used for both passengers and for cargo. You can see that there's a little bit of a post office almost, and then people going to and from certain places from here, so it's kind of like a travel point. There's groups of people here, but unsurprisingly, they all stay in the same place all day. Interesting is though, that you can tell some are lounging and having a day off, some are aiming to get on a boat to go somewhere or send a package, and some are dock workers. There's variation. Aside from the second set of twins I've seen so far that also wear the same clothes, the small town sure is packed with them. Speaking of workers, there's a lot of shops in the area. For example, right across the street from the dock is a bookshop, but many more establishments exist in the town proper. Walking past the flower girl, we can see another one just across the water, so let's begin there. This is the Bibcoon's Chuckle Club. Based off the name, I assumed it was a comedy club, but googling it, apparently it's just a regular social club. It's a club, that's all that matters. I came here in the middle of the day, and there's not a lot of patrons at this time, but it sure sounds lively. I tried to turn down the music so that I could hear the voices clearer, but it turns out that the ambience in the music is part of the same track. So instead it resulted in a very creepy silence. Not very lively, I gotta say. I returned again at sundown, and at this point it was almost packed. The busy crowd sounds make a lot more sense at this point. A little bit back on ourselves from Bibcoon's is a restaurant. This is Ray and Wings. It's a cozy restaurant that's open all day, every day. There's a few patrons, not packed or anything, and the audio makes sense in here. Just a few hums and laughs coming from the actual characters and not from a background track. There's not a lot of talking like there is in the club, which makes sense for a restaurant of this size. Daytime has a lot more customers than nighttime, so kind of the opposite from Bibcoon's, but the same old man seems to visit alone every day. He sits by himself and talks to himself, but the chair opposite has a plate of pancakes and a drink. I came back several times and that seat is never taken. The pancakes and the drink are there, even when the old man isn't around, but you can apply some environmental storytelling here if you want, which I appreciate. If we move on from Ray and Wings and keep walking into the center of town, the main street, I'd say, there's lots of smaller shops scattered along the road. I kind of got distracted a little bit by a town guard that was walking around, but he was just idly strolling on the bridge, so let's move on. The first small shop we see here is a toy shop. This is not user interactive, so you as a player cannot buy anything from here. The shop sells cute plushies and seems to get a lot of business, as apparently a certain toy is always sold out. However, I can see one in the window and one out on display, so she's lying. Anyway, based on this info, it does seem like the town gets a lot of traffic. While here, I saw a lantern maker, or whatever he is, that I also noticed outside Bibcoon's, and my stalking instincts took over. After following this man for a while, I noticed that he walks down to Bibcoon's, then along the main street a little, then back down. Not a very long route, and he doesn't really have a destination, but good to note. A little bit further down, we have Meadow's Bug Bazaar. As you might gather from the name, this stall sells insects. This is user interactive. Players can actually buy from here, as insects are a crafting material in the game used to make outfits. I don't think the bugs are killed in the process, but I actually don't know. I didn't think about that until now. It's kind of messed up. Moving on, we have the Super Healthy Juice Bar. That's the name. It speaks for itself, I would say. This is not user interactive, so you can actually not buy any super healthy juices from this bar. It is interesting though. Apparently they sell juices, but there's a couple right here drinking what looks like tea, so. But hey, what's tea if not hot leaf juice? Right? I like this little seating area though, very cozy, very central. It's a nice location. Good for you, super healthy juice bar owner. Next, we have Matilda's Botanical Home, which is a stall that sells plants of various kinds. This is user interactive, as plants are used as a crafting material in the game, same as bugs. I like that when I got the camera up to get some B-roll, the stall owner posed for the camera. Despite her being static, standing in this place here every single day, it made her feel more alive than all the people just aimlessly strolling around around town. The fact that the player's actions affected her actions is really cool. Moving on again, we have Patro's Boutique. Here they sell accessories, mainly bows. Very cute. This is user interactive as the game is all about fashion, so buying accessories kind of comes with the point of the game. The person manning the stall here also reacts to the camera, which is fun. I like this. I also randomly found out that the old woman from earlier is part of a group of triplets. Good to know. Continuing onward, we have Ridley's Materialtopia. What a name. Here they sell fur and feathers. This is, again, user interactive as these are crafting materials. Don't worry, these are ethically sourced. You get these by brushing the animals. You groom them. It's okay. Not the bad kind of grooming, please. Oh god, this is innocent. The person running this stall does not pose for the camera, despite me trying a few times. I don't know, maybe she's shy, or maybe I just had a little bug, who knows. Oh god, I'm thinking about the bugs again. I like that not everyone poses every time you bring up the camera. It kind of gives them different personalities in a way. And when they do pose, they pose differently. It's not like there's just one pose that they all default to. Not like that. Next, we have another place that you can actually enter, which is Marquez Boutique. This place sells clothing items, so naturally it's user interactive. This is the only big shop that sells articles of clothing and not just accessories, which is kind of odd for such a fashion-focused world, but it also does make sense when you remember a lot of people here design and make their own clothes. I like this place. I feel like normally when you go shopping in a small town, the only clothing you can really find is stuff that's meant for 2 generations ago, so that's cool. I guess you kind of have to stay up to trend if you're a fashion-focused world. Heading out and moving on, we come across a newspaper stall. You can't buy any as a player, so it's not user interactive, but you can talk to the seller to hear the breaking news. Also, there's 2 people by the stall gossiping about the news with each other, so you can get some more local lore from here. Which is basically what newspapers are, right? Local lore. There's more newspapers a short walk away, right next to Ray and Wings. These are outside an unmarked building, which I'm assuming is where they make the papers. Just a guess from what I'm seeing. Scattered around town, there are hot air balloon stalls. These are actually user interactive and give you a bird's eye view of the town. From here, we can see the size of the area, but again, more on that later. Unmarked and unmanned shops and stalls do exist, which add to making the town feel more busy, but I don't know what these shops do, which make them feel more like set dressing and not really that lively. Even though I can't shop at the juice bar, for example, it helps make it feel more alive to see workers and customers there. Seeing shops exist with no one around just kind of makes it feel more dead than alive. Continuing down another street, which is basically an extension of the main street. This is Florawish Lane, which is the main entrance to town. Here I found some more shops, but I stumbled upon a second flower girl on the way, so I followed her. Of course I did. Are you surprised? This is where things get interesting. If they haven't been already, I don't know, I'm hoping they are. This girl actually had a goal. She stopped by the next shop we're going to talk about to look at the advertising outside. This is the first person I've seen that's actually stopped and not just turned around to go back the same way they came right away. Anyway, our next shop is the Gourmet Candy Store. This place sells candies that transform your outfit into different ones, and so because of this, it's user interactive. Across from the candy store is an old lady knitting, but there's tons of materials outside and a person who seems to be browsing, so I'm unsure if this is a small business or simply a hobbyist who likes the outdoors. Either way, it's not user interactive. You can't buy anything from here. You can talk to the woman though. Also, when I got the camera out for the b-roll, the old lady stood up, which was very sweet and polite. Right next to the candy store, we have Elena's Orchid Store. The name fully speaks for itself here. It's a store where this woman named Elena sells orchids. This is user interactive, as orchids are a crafting material, so if you're running out, this is where you go. As I was looking around this area, I came across another woman that was out walking down the street, and so I ended up following her. I felt that people might have been onto me as I was running around town for a while, so I decided to change my outfit again. And can you believe it? This woman also had a goal. After walking down the street and out into the outskirts of town a little bit, she stopped by a house for a few seconds before turning around and walking back again. What I'm assuming happened here is that she knocked on the door and no one was home. After following this woman back to Florawish Lane, I saw a little boy out on a walk, so as weird as it felt for a little while, I followed him too. To make it abundantly clear, I don't support this sort of behavior in real life. Balloon Boy over here walked in a circle. He walked through town, down a back street, and back where we began, so pretty simple. Also along this route, I found a fourth old lady from before. They're not triplets, they're quadruplets. I'm very impressed. I do find it intriguing that the people walking down this specific street seem to have more varied movements than others I've seen around town so far. Maybe it's because this is the main street into Florawish, and this is also where the players come from when they visit the very first time. So maybe it's a case of them wanting to put their best foot forward. Who knows? Most of the buildings in town, I assume, are living quarters, as they're unmarked and off limits to players, but there are other buildings that are not stores that players can enter. The first establishment we'll talk about is essentially the main reason why you come to Florawish in the first place. This is the Stylists Guild. This is basically the main hub for all the stylists in the game, at least in Florawish, which is basically everyone who can craft clothing anytime, anywhere by harnessing the magical power in the world. This place trains and supports stylists, so it's almost like an education/help center. Right across from the Stylist Guild, we have the Wishing Tree. Now, this is obviously not an establishment or a building that you can enter, it's a tree, but it is a local tradition and the reason why a lot of people come to Florawish, as people hang their wishes here in the hopes that they'll come true one day. Kind of like a religious or spiritual sort of thing. Next, we have the Mayor's Residence, which is also the Mayor's office. Kind of speaks for itself, you know. Official business, I don't know what you do with the mayor. I don't talk to mayors, it's not what I do. We also have the Kingdom Guard's office, which is pretty self-descriptive. This is where you find the town guard. I guess this is where you go if you have a legal problem of some kind. I don't really know how I feel about them having a corkboard of leads right out in the open for anyone to see, though. Doesn't exactly instill a lot of confidence in their confidentiality, but it's nice decor, I suppose. Maybe you've been wondering about the big building you can see in the distance. This is a huge warehouse right on the outskirts of town, where they store all the wishes the people have hung on the tree throughout the many years. They never throw any of them. Also a little bit on the outskirts of town, we have the Daisy Inn, which, as you might gather from the name, is an inn. I tried renting a room, but they were all booked up, which again alludes to this being a busy town. But now that we've made our way through most of Florawish, does it really feel that busy? Better yet, does it feel like a town? The reason this matters to me is if Florawish is really a village, it would feel too lively, and if it classifies as a big city, it would feel too small, so there's a bit of a dissonance that way. In order to make a game feel alive, it has to feel realistic, but I don't think it will feel realistic if it doesn't feel like what it's meant to be. Does that make sense? Like if you see an apple in a video game but they tell you it's a pear, you're instantly gonna be taken out of it, right? So if it's meant to be a town, it has to feel like a town. It's pretty obvious when you put it this way, but this is why I think it's worth looking at, even if the individual aspects are more important. So if Florawish is a town depends on what requirements we follow. The US Census Bureau says that small towns are incorporated areas with 5,000 residents or fewer. Meanwhile, the UK House of Commons Library says that small towns have between 7,500 and 24,900 residents. I haven't counted every single person I've seen in Florawish, but based on size, I don't think we quite hit 7.5k. Meanwhile, if we ask people on Reddit, most of them go off of vibes. One user said that to them it's more about amenities. It needs a main street with at least a dozen shops, a post office, a bus stop, and maybe a train station, one primary and one secondary school, a handful of pubs or cafes or restaurants, and some sort of playing field. Another user says that a small town requires at least 3,000 adults/voters and half of the following: a medical center, pharmacy, post office, school, cultural center such as a theater or library, large businesses, and public transportation. Also, there's a lot of people stating that a town is a town when it has town rights. Doesn't matter the amount of inhabitants or amenities. So, since Florawish is referred to as a town, it must have been granted that status. Of course, this depends on what metric you choose to go by, but just walking through Florawish, it does give off a town feel. There's big open streets, the establishments feel large, even small businesses seem very busy. The dock counts as public transport, and that is also quite busy. For example, the place that I grew up in was definitely not a town, but it did have a lot of the listed amenities, so essentially we are circling back to going off of vibes. Florawish has town vibes, and it is described as a small town, so again, it must have gotten the aforementioned town rights. So sure, Florawish is a town. So far it makes sense, and we can move on. Ultimately, what makes a place feel alive is less about the town itself and more about who lives in it. If people were static and quiet, they'd feel more like cardboard cutouts than actual inhabitants. Outside of the NPCs walking around, outside of the people working at or visiting establishments, what's everyone else up to? In a real-life town, you don't just see some people walking and working and then the rest are just standing there. Everyone has their own chores and their own hobbies. Does this go for Florawish too? Short answer, yes. Long answer, let's observe them. Dressed up as a wildlife photographer. As we've already had a look at the people by the waterfront, let's start right in the center of town by the wishing tree this time. Here, there's many different activities observed. There's people drinking at cafes, friends talking, kids playing hopscotch, there's an old woman knitting, people wishing by the tree, of course, there's a man reading a newspaper by the newspaper stand, there's dogs being cute, and also a graffiti artist. Of course, there's fashion-interested people of various kinds, such as this person showing off their clothes, friends discussing designs, people window shopping. Moving away from the town center and going closer to Ray and Wings, there's different activities here you can't see in the center of town. There's people painting with their easels set up, this person fishing, a guy sweeping leaves, a street magician entertaining some kids, and a photographer. Some activities are of course repeated, like people praying by the statue, friends talking to each other, and people enjoying a drink outside the restaurant. Moving further out, closer to the mayor's residence, we can find a man observing a statue, another photographer, someone sweeping leaves outside the residence, someone reading, and a couple looking at a map, which I have seen a few times walking around town. In the area, there's also a man cleaning his windows, and a woman watering her flowers. Going back to Florawish Lane, which is where the candy shop is, you can find a lot of people hanging out and talking to each other, or interacting with the shops in the area. You can also see a couple taking care of their plants, while their kids not far away observe some flowers or the bugs within. You can tell that this is a calmer area more focused on nature, with working people tending to their plants and doing some sort of farm-centered work. And there's a lot of people just relaxing here, reading books, taking in the view from up high, etc. What I've noticed is that people who aren't doing a direct activity still have a purpose to some degree. For example, by Florawish Lane, there's people enjoying the view of the water and flowers from up high. The whole town is built at the top of an incline, but Florawish Lane provides the most unobscured view of the surrounding area. So this makes sense. By Ray and Wings, we have a man reading the menu outside of the restaurant, one man enjoying the view from the bridge, and one woman sitting on a bench just enjoying her day. Maybe she's even the mother of the two kids being entertained by the magician not far away. By the mayor's residence, there's a woman outside who's idling, but looking at her body language, it kind of feels like she's on a break and pondering something that has to do with work. She kind of looks like she's deep in thought, maybe even stressed. Because of so many others doing direct activities, these people can get away with basically just existing. Because of where they're placed in the world, their existence still makes sense. For example, you won't see people enjoying the view in a random street corner, and you won't see people drinking tea far away from a cafe. The environment and the people existing in it go hand in hand. Speaking of the environment, by now you've probably realized just how beautiful this game is. Paying attention for even just a split second, you quickly notice all the pops of color, but also all the objects that make the town feel busy, even outside of all the people. And the town really is gorgeous. I mean, look at the buildings. They're not repeated blocks, they all have character and they're all different from one another rather than being copy-pastes. There's clutter everywhere, and the clutter makes sense. Farms have hay, barrels, carts, places to chop wood. The greenhouse outside of town and the flower enthusiasts have gardening tools, the wishing tree has wishes and lanterns, the toy shop has plushies, etc. It's stuff that very obviously should be there to make places feel more organic and real. There's also stuff such as hanging laundry, road signs, book stands, things that don't need to be there, but they are. And they do add a lot to the environment, making it feel actually lived in. Even things such as smoke coming from chimneys, fog in the mountains, and clouds moving across the sky really add to making the world feel alive. Of course, flowers being everywhere not only makes sense, it's in the town name, but that too contributes to a feeling of realistic life. If it were a concrete jungle, they'd have to make up for it in other areas, as it would feel lifeless and plain. Thankfully, that's not what the game is like. Trees and plants sway in the wind, even the grass close to the ground is affected by this. Leaves fall from the various trees, the water comes down the mountain and ends up in the lake. There's fish in the lake, but only in designated fishing areas for the player to interact with. I do think this is the worst example of wildlife in the game. It does get better from here. Look at the bugs, for example. They're everywhere and their placements make sense. There's bees by flowers, moths by street lights, grasshoppers in fields, so on and so forth. There's dogs and cats walking around town. The dogs can be found on the street. They're pretty friendly and sometimes follow you around. Cats can be found both on the street and on rooftops, and they tend to be more skittish. Birds can also be found both on the ground and on rooftops, and they fly away when you approach them. You can also find birds flying around the sky. There's also sheep in the farming area right on the outskirts of town, walking around being pretty chill. This is the only place you can find them, which of course makes sense. You wouldn't have sheep in the middle of a town. So, Now that we've looked at pretty much everything there is to look at in Florawish, how do we determine how alive it feels? For this, we need to decide what factors matter, which don't, and which matter more than others. And for that, I obviously need opinions, and what better place to find opinions than Reddit? Looking at Reddit, there's a lot of people discussing what makes a game world feel alive. Most people seem to be in agreement. They want it to feel like NPCs have a life outside of interacting with the player, that they have a schedule or something to do. Some users also mentioned ambience and background noise, the world feeling lived in rather than just being a set, and interactivity, so being able to use objects and enter buildings, for example. I also saw a lot of people mention Watch Dogs 2 as an example, which is one of my all-time favorite games, so if you'd like me to make a video like this on that game, do let me know. Okay? But yeah, essentially it depends on a lot of different factors. Stuff like this really is based off of the vibes you get when you play a game. So I figured, in order to measure how alive Florawish feels, let's create a scoring system. For this system, I came up with 7 different categories in which the game can score. NPCs, which considers the amount of NPCs in relation to the area and their behavior. Animals, so if pets and or farm animals exist and their behavior. Also if any kind of wildlife exists and their behavior. Human-made environment, so stuff like buildings, clutter, amenities. Natural environment, which is foliage, trees, flowers, even the weather. Environmental effects, so stuff like fog and smoke and leaves falling from trees, for example. Sounds, which is mostly background noise, anything diegetic that's actually part of the game world. And interactivity, what the player can and can't do in the world. 0 on the scale is essentially Tumbleweed Town, except for the fact that not even Tumbleweed would thrive here. And 10 on the scale is about as real as it can be, with very few limitations. It's less about what does exist and more about what doesn't exist. So if you're not allowed to do something, for example, it has to make sense why. Like in GTA 5, you can drive around killing pedestrians, but in this game you cannot kill anyone because you're not that kind of person. Alrighty, let's summarize and score our observations. Hot girls use notes. For its size, Florawish sometimes feels like there's too many people around, but it does classify as a small town rather than a village. Also, it does have a dock, so it seems to be important for transport. Plus, there's the wishing tree, which is a tradition in the surrounding area, so probably a lot of people travel here from outside villages to visit. We can also tell from how the inn is fully booked that a lot of people are not locals, but are just here to visit. There's activity variation, and some NPCs even do things that no one else does, such as the woman doing graffiti. Most NPCs are busy one way or another, talking to friends, manning a stall, tending to plants, whatever. But even people without anything to do have reasons for it. They're enjoying the view or taking a break from work. However, I am deducting half a point as all of these people fade into and out of their activities. It would add a bit to see them walking from their house or the inn in the morning to their activity location, or maybe have them do more than just one thing all day every day. I do like that a lot of people pose when my camera's out, and I also like that there's less people out when it's raining and also during night. People kind of come with the sun, just like in real life. I will deduct 1 full minus point as NPCs do not react when you bump into them or smack them with your net. Yes, of course I try this. I love Animal Crossing. Hello. I'm also deducting half a point as NPCs do move around if you're in the way, but the pathfinding is kind of wonky, so it's like they walk in a weird square rather than kind of naturally finding a way around you. So the score for the NPC category is 8 out of 10. Next category is animals, and we do have cats, dogs, birds, and sheep, and 1 bibcoon. Cannot forget the 1 bibcoon. It does make sense not to have undomesticated animals in the middle of town. I like that animal behavior is different, so for example cats and birds are more timid and can also be found on rooftops. Dogs are friendlier and stay on the ground. Sheep are pretty chill and only exist in the outskirts of town. They all walk and run around. Cats and dogs clean themselves or sleep. Birds look for food on the ground. Sheep, again, just kind of vibe. Sheep are so chill. I am gonna deduct half a point because of pets only interacting with the player character and not NPCs. So cats, for example, are skittish around you, but no other characters. It does make sense because you do gather crafting materials from cats, and if they were to run around all the time, it would be really difficult and annoying to try and get a hold of them, but I can't deny that it would add a little bit more, so I am deducting half a point still. Similarly, I'm deducting 1 full point as it would have been fun to see people playing with their pets or walking a route with them. I am deducting another point as there's only 2 cat variations, 1 type of dog, I'm pretty sure only 1 type of bird, and I would have liked to see more. The sheep look the same. them, but they're sheep, so I'll forgive it. The score in the animal category is 7.5 out of 10. Next, we have human-made environment. The buildings are varied and feel individually built. They have different aesthetics and colors to them, and they're built differently depending on location. So farmhouses exist on the outskirts of town, apartment buildings and townhouses in town. There's clutter aplenty, making the world feel lived in. Even things such as various kinds of fencing and seating really gives the town variety and character. There's amenities of different kinds, such as shops and eateries. There's a social club, guard office, mayor's residence, and of course the stylist guild. I like that amenities are more or less busy depending on the time of day. So the restaurant is busy during the day and Bibcoons is busy during the night, for example. I am gonna deduct half a point for the lack of a school, and only half because I still understand wanting kids to be out and about. It does make the town feel livelier, which is the point of the video, but, you know, realism. I'm also deducting a full point because of the lack of a hospital or infirmary, especially because there's a whole storyline about people randomly going comatose. But whatever, I guess. The score for the human-made environment category is 8.5 out of 10. Next, we have natural environment, and there is a lot of variation here. There's many different plants and flowers, various kinds of trees. They're all very detailed. Trees have individual leaves. Cherry blossom trees are full of individual flowers. It's all very pretty. The plants sway beautifully in the wind. They're not stiff at all. Stems and branches feel like they move individually rather than just being one whole bush wobbling all together. There's a day and night cycle that has 5 different periods over 24 in-game hours. So you have sunup, dawn, day, dusk, and night. And they all add to the ambience, of course. You have the warm daylight, the beautiful sunup, the cozy night with street lights and house lights. I am deducting 1 point as I think only 2 types of weather exist, and this is rainy and not rainy. I'm also deducting half a point as running through certain bushes just kind of makes them wobble real quick and that's it. They're not very reactive, it's not very realistic, but at least they do move, which is why it's only half a point. The score for this category is 8.5 out of 10. Next, we have environmental effects, and there's not really much to say here. They exist mostly where they should. You have fog in the mountains, clouds moving in the sky, smoke from chimneys, leaves falling from trees, water splashes when you move around in it. It does look great coming down the river and going around rocks, and it also merges with the lake very smoothly. Speaking of the lake, that moves very nicely and looks pretty realistic in my opinion. There's fish in the water that give off ripples and bubbles, and I know that's to indicate a fishing spot, but still, it's nice. On the subject of water, watering cans have, you guessed it, water coming out of them, which is a nice small touch. They didn't have to do that, but they did. Observing this man trimming his plants, you can also see leaves and twigs falling out, which is another case of them not having to do it, but they did, which is appreciated. Faulty streetlights have sparks coming from them, and the weather vanes on top of roofs move instead of being static. There's people sweeping the streets, which obviously means dust, but additionally, the broom bristles even move side to side when pushed against the ground, which I don't know if I've ever seen a game do that. I probably have, and I just haven't noted it, but very nice. One thing that's a shame though is the fact that piles of leaves and flowers are kind of stiff. Leaves fly around if you run through them, but it would be nice if they move a little bit more. You can blow them away with your power, but that's beside the point. -1 point. The score for this category is 9 out of 10. Next, we have sounds. Speaking of sounds, I'm sorry about Coco's collar in the background. She's being very loud. For this, I turned off the music and focused on the ambience, and this changes depending on your location, the time of day, and the weather. There's sound of water by the dock, there's wind in the open field, there's crowd murmur in the town center. Nighttime has owls, which is honestly the biggest difference I could find, but still a difference, so that's nice. Your footsteps sound wet during the rain, and your footsteps in general change depending on the material you walk on, which is all pretty basic nowadays. But more importantly, your footsteps change depending on what type of shoe you wear, which is something I feel is very important in a game like this, where your footwear is obviously in focus because of fashion. So if you're wearing a sneaker, it sounds a little bit more dull. If you're wearing sharp stilettos, there's gonna be a clicky noise. Amazing. I love it. Thank you for including that. Certain smaller details and activities have sounds as well, like people watering flowers, the mailman opening and closing the mailbox, the man carving statues, and photographers taking pictures. It would be nice if you could hear people's conversations when walking past them in town, but it does make sense for the game not to do that because characters are just not voiced outside of cutscenes. However, I can't change the fact that it would add a lot to making the game feel more alive, so I am gonna deduct half a point. And only half a point because, again, it makes sense. I'm also deducting half a point for Bibcoon's Chuckle Club still having the crowd murmur sounds in the background during the day when there's only like 2 people there. And I'm also deducting 1 point as some people barely make any noise at all when they really should, such as kids playing. Have you heard kids play? They're loud. It's nice, but it's strange that they don't make any noise. The music in the game is beautiful, and I have no notes there. Hopefully you can agree with me. All the music I've used in this video is from this very game. Just like in Skyrim, the music adds to the environment around you. It's very complimentary, so that's good. I like that different establishments have different songs that fit their respective vibes, and also some places do not have any music at all, which works. The score for this category is 8 out of 10. Now let's move on to the final category, which is interactivity. There's quite a few shops and establishments for you to purchase from or enter, but there's also a few public places and stores that you cannot enter or buy from, such as the super healthy juice bar and the toy shop, so I will deduct 1 point for that because I wish you could at the very least enter. I can't deny that it would make the town feel more alive, so. There's also a lot of private homes that you cannot enter, but this makes sense. You can interact with some people, but far from everyone. I think most people you see in town you can't talk or listen to, so I'm deducting half a point for this, and only half because even though we have this ability in real life, you could talk to anyone you would like to, you probably don't, right? So it's fine. There's not that many objects to interact with other than some, not all, some seats, and also signs, though there are some small board games to play and book passages to read here and there, and also there's hopscotch. It would be nice if you could sit on any chair not already taken, and that's also meant for the public, so I will deduct another point for that. Also, the environment pretty much is not destructible at all. I don't necessarily want to wreck the place, but I do think you should at least be able to pop the balloons, so 1 minus point for no mischief allowed. So the score for the interactivity category is 6.5 out of 10. Lowest out of all of them. With all that looked at, the final score is 8 out of 10. Not a bad score, but also it's not really so much about score as it is just the feeling you get. Now, I don't think a number is going to perfectly represent what you are going to feel if you were to step foot in Florawish. Do you think it was too lenient, or maybe even too harsh? What would you give the game? Is there anything you think I should have considered that I didn't? Do let me know. Ultimately, I believe that without stopping and looking too closely at the details, the town of Florawish does feel very alive on surface level. Much of it is thanks to aesthetics. There's lots of variety in the world, there's people congregating in popular areas such as the town center and dock, and accompanying sounds make it feel even more real. All of this makes up for the lack of interactivity in the world. Also the fact that this is just one small town out of many locations in the game. Of course, it's very difficult to cram something abstract like vibes and feeling into something concrete like a scoring system, but I did my best, and I hope that you enjoyed. Thank you for watching. I'm not entirely opposed to doing this again, so if you want to see more like this on other video game towns, I'd love to. Please tell me.